she's so fine. Hell of a ride, blows my mind. Hell of a ride, lights my day.
What's good, guys? This story came out about midnight last night, and it was so bizarre I had to bring it to the channel. It's coming out of North Richland Hills, Texas. I set up a studio in my garage. North Texas woman recalls losing nearly $200,000 to Bruno Mars Imposter. There's a video with this, and I'll play it at the end of this. A North Richland Hills woman is speaking out for the first time about the romance scam that cost her close to $200,000. She is afraid of becoming a target again, so CBS 11 News is not revealing her identity. Jane, as they're calling her, says she was adapting to a new way of life in 2018 after her husband of 25 years died. She moved into a new home, bought a new phone, and spent a lot of time on social media interacting with friends and strangers. One man came on strong right away, using a line from a famous Bruno Mars song, "I Think I Want to Marry You." His profile had Mars' name and photos, so Jane assumed it was the famous singer just looking for someone to talk to. They spent weeks trading messages and memes. She shared details about her life, her family, even her finances. Quote, "That's the first thing they do is try to be your friend," said Jane. "Get to know you and be comfortable with you," end quote. Bruno said he was in a bind. He needed $5,000 to help pay for rental cars he'd used on tour. When Jane didn't immediately say no, he asked for more. Quote, "It went from 5 to 10, then we started getting bigger," end quote. Jane sent a cashier's check for $10,000, but Bruno said he needed more help, more money for his tour. Quote, "The next thing I knew, I was going to the bank and cashing out all of my bonds," end quote, said Jane. She handed over another cashier's check, this time for $90,000. Jane and Bruno's messages were filled with declarations of love and devotion. She received an engagement ring in the mail. It arrived in a priority envelope from Houston with Mars' name in the return address. It wasn't like we were in love, like love. It was more like I was in love with his talent, Jane told CBS 11. Jane says the relationship consumed her life. She was up all night answering messages, while her days were spent collecting cashier's checks and making withdrawals from her bank. She couldn't explain why she didn't tell anyone about the relationship. She just bought in and let herself believe. The Bruno Mars Imposter told her he was unhappy with his tour and all the traveling. He asked to come live with her in North Richland Hills. Jane bought music equipment, guitars, drums, microphones, and made room for the entire band. Quote, "I put up some bunk beds for them," she said. "I set up a studio in my garage," end quote. Then another text message emergency. Mars had been detained at Dulles Airport. Jane received a copy of the police report that said Mars was in custody until he paid fees to the airport and pilots. Quote, "They were constantly showing me pictures of them in jail, pictures of Bruno Mars in jail," end quote, said Jane. One image showed a headshot of the real Bruno Mars edited onto a stock image of a man in handcuffs. Jane was desperate to make the online relationship real. She gathered money for his bond and texted a photo of the stacks of cash and money orders. That's when the scammers became even bolder. One of them came to her front door. Quote, "Bruno had someone come here to get that money so they could get him out of jail," said Jane. "It had to be quickly, of course. The security guard needed the money right now. Everything was an emergency," end quote. She handed over the money and waited for Bruno to be released. Soon she received more messages. He wanted to fly to Texas right away, but he needed $5,000 for jet fuel. After months and months of giving, Jane finally realized she'd been scammed. She refused to hand over any more money until Bruno repaid some of what she'd loaned him. Quote, "They threatened to poison and kill me if I didn't get them the money. That's how it got towards the end," end quote, said Jane. "As you start giving to these people, they just want more and more and more." Jane contacted police. Investigators traced the cashier's check to 2 Nigerian citizens in Houston. Both are charged with money laundering, but prosecutors believe the mastermind, the actual Mars Imposter, is overseas. Quote, "I'm so ashamed that this happened to me," said Jane. "I'm so sorry that I helped this person, even though I thought it was a famous person," end quote. She is more careful on social media now, and she's increased security at her home. But even after everything she's been through, she's still a fan of the real Bruno Mars. Quote, if he got on Instagram and said, hey, I need some help, I'd help him out, end quote, she laughed. While this is an extreme example, the FBI says romance scams are on the rise. Last year, more than 23,000 victims reported more than $605 million in losses. That's compared to 2015, when there were just over 12,000 victims and $203 million in losses.
You will hear from the North Richland Hills woman at the center of a scam that captured worldwide attention.
Police say a Texas woman was scammed out of $100,000 after she fell in love with someone pretending to be entertainer Bruno Mars.
Cybercrimes prosecutors say he befriended her on Instagram, convinced her that he was the famous entertainer and that he needed help with his touring expenses.
For the first time, she is speaking out about the money and the men behind this scheme. She agreed to the interview as long as we don't identify her. So for this story, we're just going to call her Jane. She's concerned about her safety and doesn't want to become a victim again. Jane says she was adjusting to a new life in 2017. Her husband of 25 years had passed away. She moved into a new home, bought a new phone, and joined social media.
I thought, well, they are my friends, right?
She communicated with friends and strangers. One man came on strong right away.
The first thing that they sent to me was, I want to marry you. And they sent Bruno Mars pictures to me.
The profile had the singer's name and photos, so Jane believed it was the Bruno Mars, just looking for someone to talk to. They spent weeks trading messages.
That's the first thing they do, is they try to be your friend and get to know you, and get to be comfortable with you.
Bruno said he was in a bind. He needed $5,000 right away to pay for rental cars. When she didn't immediately say no, he asked for more.
It went from 5 to 10 to then we start getting bigger. Okay.
Jane sent a cashier's check for $10,000, but Bruno said he needed more help, more money for his tour.
The next thing I knew, I was going to the bank and I was cashing out all my bonds.
She handed over another cashier's check, this time for $90,000. Bruno said he was sending her something, an engagement ring. It arrived in a priority envelope from a Houston address with Mars's name.
It wasn't like we were in love, like love. It was more like I was in love with his talent.
He asked to come live with her in North Richland Hills. Jane was excited. She spent more money buying musical equipment and making room for the entire band.
I set up a studio in my garage. I bought some instruments for him. The band was going to stay here. I put some bunk beds up for him.
Then another text message emergency. Mars's plane had been detained in Washington, D.C. He was in police custody until he could pay fees to the airport and the pilots. An outrageous story, we know, but she believed it.
They were constantly showing me pictures of them in jail, pictures of Bruno Mars in jail.
It seems a lot like they're playing to your emotions. I mean, what were you feeling during all of this?
That they needed my help because I help people. That's all I know to do. I've always given from my heart.
Jane says the relationship consumed her life. She was up all night answering messages, spending her days buying cashier's checks and withdrawing cash around town. She collected another $50,000. That's when the scammers became even bolder.
Bruno had someone come here to get that money so they could get him out of jail. It had to be quickly, of course. The security guard needed the money right now. Everything was emergency.
A man appeared at her front door and took the money for Mars's release. The fake Bruno said he wanted to fly to Texas right away, but he needed $5,000 for jet fuel. After months of giving and giving and giving, Jane finally realized she'd been duped.
Now they threatened to poison and kill me if I didn't give them the money. That's the way it got near the end. It doesn't get any better. As you start giving to these people, they want more and more and more.
She contacted police who traced the cashier's checks to 2 Nigerian citizens in Houston. Both are charged with money laundering. It's believed the mastermind, the Mars Imposter, is overseas.
I'm so ashamed that this happened to me. I'm so sorry that I helped this person, even though I thought he was a famous person.
But even now, Jane says, she's still a fan of the real Bruno Mars.
If he got on Instagram and said, hey, I need some help, I'd help him out.
Jane couldn't really explain to us why she didn't tell anyone what was happening sooner. She just bought in and let herself believe. And this, I know, it's an extreme example, but the FBI says romance scams are on the rise. In 2020, more than 23,000 victims reported more than $605 million in losses because of romance scams. Compare that to 2015, when there were around just over 12,000 victims and $203 million in losses.
I can honestly say that I have had people contact me on social media that claim to be famous people. I never bought into it, but that has happened to me more than one time on social media. But this is someone's mother, someone's sister, someone's auntie. I can't believe that somebody didn't know what was going on in her life, that didn't speak up and try to stop this. Regardless, I had to bring this story to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys.